Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Welcome back to Time to Teach. This is episode 31, Knowledge and Understanding. This is part of the Series 6 Amazing Units by Design. So that is exactly what we're focusing on in this entire series. It's just really the nitty-gritty of unit design and how to design units so that they're truly meaningful, and meaningful in a way that it's not just something that affects students inside of the school walls, but it's really affecting students outside of the school walls. You know, in my opinion, that's really what we're doing in education. It's really meant to impact students outside of school. What we should do in school should really kind of mimic, perhaps reflect, and definitely prepare students for life. And I don't mean the whole gotta, get them ready for the real world. Yes, of course. But what I mean is it should be so impactful that it's something that they're taking into the world with them. So that's what we are doing. If you did miss last episode, you'll want to go back because that's where you get an introduction of this unit and really just kind of the whole layout of the backwards design. So definitely go back and catch that, episode 30, if you did not. You'll want to follow this series particularly. Probably best in order. If not in order, you definitely want to catch everything in the series because it really goes together, whereas in the past there's been some series where you can maybe still understand certain ideas and concepts even if you missed a few of the episodes within the series. But this, if you really want a full understanding of unit design and great ways to do that, then you need to catch all of the episodes. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up with the segment Wins and Fails for the week. So, the week that I'm recording now, it's, we're about a week away from our holiday break, and that's exciting. But as we all know, it's also a busy time, and it's also a time where students can start to feel a little bit antsy and anxious, especially as, they're preparing for trips and they're having these conversations at home and they get excited. So it's just a difficult time. But I have had some wins. In fact, this week, I'm not really sure what has come over me, but I just started to feel very overwhelmed by all the things in my classroom. I have a lot of things. And this kind of goes along with being an international teacher. Teachers will come, they might bring things or acquire things, materials, whatnot, supplies for the classroom, but typically they don't take it back with them when they leave because they're leaving back to their home country. So clearly it's very difficult to be transporting all of those things back to your country. So just, what happens is that things get accumulated year after year, or specifically teacher after teacher. And when you're an international teacher and you're first coming into a school, you don't know what things are okay to keep, what things are not okay to keep, and even if I can't keep it, what is the correct way, to whom do I donate it, what would be the correct thing to do with this. So if you're someone like me, it becomes very overwhelming, so I just kind of don't deal with that. Those are the administrative tasks that I put off. If you're into the Myers-Briggs personality, I am an INFJ, and that's something that we are notorious for, is administrative tasks. We strongly dislike. I'm sure many people do not appreciate administrative tasks, but INFJs specifically, we are very, very driven by huge, valuable things. We pretty much just we want to be dedicating our time to make the world better. It's what drives us. So we only want to do things that, spend our energy in that way. So if it's something like cleaning out a classroom and going through those things, it is very tedious and just very taxing on the INFJ. But like I said, this week I have just, I just kind of looked at my environment, that I've been in for like 6 years and decided, I need to do something about this. So I actually started going through, math manipulatives. I have things scattered here and there, and, so many things to actually go in and find, I'm looking for the domino cards, or I'm looking for the dot cards, or whatever specific thing I'm looking for. They're all kinds of together and not well organized, so that for me to go and get something that I'm looking for becomes impossible, because it's just the system is not set up to make it easy to find anything. So I started cleaning up my classroom after 6 years. That's somewhat sad, but definitely a win. So I'm going to take that win, and I'm continuing, and I'm not making any promises, because if I made a promise, I would keep it. So therefore, I'm not going to make a promise, but I'm just kind of slowly but surely kind of going through and doing what I can when I can. And we will see where that goes. So that was my big win. My big fail, nothing I could really control, I suppose. But this week, oh my goodness. So I want to say, actually starting last week, it is the season. Everyone is sick. I have had, no joke, about almost every single day 4 to 5 students absent. So of course we know that this it makes it very difficult when you have absent students, especially right now. We just launched a new unit, which is our seasons unit. We just launched that on Monday, and it's also a brand new bimester. So the launching of a unit is huge, because things that we are doing are now different. Granted, there have been slow changes prepping us towards this launch, but specifically in writing, we have gone from narratives to a more procedural type of writing, which is our how-to unit. So this requires, some pretty good front loading at the beginning to have students observe the differences between the types of writing. And I go ahead and I've continued with it, even knowing that I have a handful of students. But I just know when those students come back, and I don't know when they're coming back. We've got like another week. But when they come back, I'm going to, I've got some extra work for me, but that's okay. Those will have to be my small groups instead of pulling, instead of doing one-to-one or pulling another type of group. Though that will be my small group for a few days, I think. Or at least some conferring to get those kiddos caught up. So those are my wins and fails for the week. I am hoping that you had some fantastic wins. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to dive right in to this episode. I'm not going to go back and recap on episode 30. I really think it's a must. You've got to listen to it. If you're listening to this one, it's really going to piggyback off of episode 30. So just make sure you do that. I would suggest going and doing that before you listen to this episode. It might not be, I think you could still understand it, but to really understand the sequencing, I do suggest going back and listening to episode 30, and then, hey, come on back over and check this out after you have listened to episode 30. So knowledge and understanding, this is really a huge basis for the understanding by design, which is really a framework for curriculum. This is a framework that I referenced last time. It's by Grant Wiggins, who is no longer here. He passed away a couple years ago, and his colleague Jay McTighe. So together, and they might have had some other persons on their team, but those two really are the main authors of understanding by design. And yeah, so understanding by design. So I really think before we can truly dive into creating this amazing unit and this masterpiece of a unit, we truly need to examine what is understanding and what is knowledge. What are the differences, and how do we achieve both knowledge and understanding? So that's kind of the whole premise around understanding by design, is that we want to create units that students walk away with a deep understanding of the concepts, but in such a way that they're able to produce and really transfer their understanding into other areas. This is a huge thing. In fact, the idea of transfer is something that has really intrigued me for many years. And as it turns out, it was something that Grant Wiggins was really working on and concentrating on academically, well, I should say professionally, in the latter years of his life. So this is where he was during his passing. He was just really, really focusing on the transfer piece. And I think once we begin to examine knowledge and understanding and what those means, I think we'll see why transfer is so hugely important. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just kind of talk about knowledge and knowing. Is it the same to know something, and is it the same to understand something? No, it's not. It's not the same. To know something is not the same to understand something. I would also add on top of that, even a person's understanding. So let's say you know, which I'm going to explain a little bit more about. Let's say you do have an understanding. There's also different depths of understanding. So it's not so clear cut. I think when we use these terms, many of us will use these terms interchangeably, but they're really not. And we need to understand them because it is the basis of our units. So knowledge, when we talk about knowledge, we're really talking about mere facts. And I don't mean mere facts as in, oh, they hold no importance, because that is not true. Yes, they are facts, and maybe what you can do with facts is limited. But I would very much argue that having facts or having knowledge is very beneficial and very much necessary. So we do need knowledge. We absolutely do need knowledge. So when you think about, okay, what am I doing when I have knowledge? Well, when I have knowledge, I'm going to be able to maybe restate something, retell something, recall something. So these are important things, certainly, if we're going to deepen our knowledge to then create deep understandings. We do need knowledge. So let's just kind of look at a couple of examples where, I might know something, but I might not necessarily understand something. So one thing we can think about is, we know the sky is blue, but do we understand that? Do we understand the why behind it, and that deeper meaning? We know that exercise is very good for our bodies, but do we actually understand why that is, how it is? How is the exercise impacting us? What is the impact of it? We might know the impact, but do we know how it's doing that? Because once we begin to understand how it impacts our body, we then have a much deeper understanding than the simple knowledge of, yes, exercise is good. Yes, but why? Yes, but how? And it's the yes, but why and the yes, but how that is going to get us to a much deeper understanding. Let me throw in one more example for us. I think we have heard the term formative assessment. We all know that term. We know what formative assessments are. We know what summative assessments are. We have that knowledge. But understanding of formative assessments is much different. When I think about understanding formative assessments, part of what I think of is understanding maybe best ways of doing formative assessment, knowing how to manage formative assessments, maybe understanding how to really examine the data that comes out of those formative assessments and then plan on, what do I do next with it? So having a knowledge of formative assessment is great because you cannot get to the understanding without a knowledge of it, but the understanding is really what is going to impact what you do. So this is hugely important, hugely important, because they are two different things, but we really do have a tendency to use these terms in an interchangeable way, and they're just, they're really not interchangeable, yet we continue to use it that way. So to actually quote directly from the Understanding by Design book, which it is one of my most favorite books. So on page 38, and I am looking, I have an old edition. I have the second edition, and I'm sure I got this. Well, it must have been, I want to say 2009, 2010. So I'm sure they have an updated version, but this is coming out of the second edition on page 38. So just to kind of quote exactly how they define knowledge versus understanding. Okay, so knowledge. Here are a few things, are a few ways that we can describe exactly what knowledge is. So knowledge is the facts. A body of coherent facts, verifiable claims, right or wrong, I know something to be true, and I respond on cue with what I know. So when I think of knowledge, I'm thinking of very surface level things, factual information. And being able to maybe, I can answer a question using my knowledge. I can listen to something and respond back with what I heard, giving the information, really just kind of re-saying something that I just heard, or maybe didn't just hear but heard at some time. So it's just it's very surface level. Now let's not get confused and think that because it's surface level it doesn't matter, but of course it matters. It does matter, but remember, this is something necessary, but to get to really more of our end goal, which is the deep understanding. So let me contrast that with definitions of understanding. So understanding is the meaning of facts, the theory that provides coherence and meaning to those facts, fallible in process theories, a matter of degree or sophistication. I understand why it is, what makes it knowledge, and I judge when to and when not to use what I know. So you can see from that it's much deeper because you're really understanding the implications of whatever that thing is. You're understanding the implications, you're understanding when is it appropriate to use it, when is it not appropriate. You could probably see possibilities with your understanding, and it's going to allow you, well, this, right, please no, I'm not quoting. I no longer was quoting after I judge when to and when not to use. But when I think about the deep understanding, because I can see possibilities because of my understanding, I can see possibilities and create something new. Maybe I can merge understood concepts and really go into somewhere, almost maybe somewhere completely different than where this journey started. I know this is sounding so ambiguous because getting it out of my head is difficult right now. But it's really like seeing the possibility, seeing what you cannot see, seeing beyond what's there. And there are different depths to that. There are different levels of understanding, but that is, in a nutshell, what understanding is. So let me go ahead and read a little bit more. This is on page 39. And I'd like to read a paragraph that I really like the way that it describes understanding. Okay, so understanding thus involves meeting a challenge for thought. We encounter a mental problem, an experience with puzzling or no meaning. We use judgment to draw upon our repertoire of skill and knowledge to solve it. As Bloom put it, understanding is the ability to marshal skills and facts wisely and appropriately through effective application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Doing something correctly, therefore, is not by itself evidence of understanding. It might have been an accident or done by rote. To understand is to have it done in the right way, often reflected in being able to explain why a particular skill, approach, or body of knowledge is or is not appropriate in a particular situation. Boy, I love the way they describe that. So it makes much more sense than the way I tried to describe it. But this is the heart of what understanding is. I mean, really, in a nutshell, seeing beyond and really applying it when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And you know, this can be challenging. I'm not even, it is challenging. This is very challenging. You know, something that we're doing on my grade level team is we are standards based. Our report cards are standard based. And the idea with standards is that students have met these standards. They are at mastery of these standards by the end of the school year. That's the goal. So the implication there, and really the challenge there, is, okay, so what does that mean for the entire school year? If we're using those standards to report on, what does it mean the students are doing throughout the school year? What are they supposed to have met in bimester 1, 2, 3, and 4 if they're supposed to be at mastery? So it really takes us as a team sitting down and saying, hey, look, okay, we're in this, we had to recently do because we just closed out bimester 2 and consequently closed out report cards. So we had to sit down and we had to look at our standards and say, okay, this is the standard that's supposed to be mastered by the end of the school year. So how are we reporting out on it? What do we expect students to do right now in the school year? So then we had to discuss each standard and decide right now, okay, what is it we really expect? What does that look like for right now? And what are levels of, they have mastered it, and what are the levels involved? And it's yeah, I'm not going to kid you. It can be hard work. It's much harder when I think you're beginning to really start to think this way and go away from grades. When you go away from traditional grades, you have to actually be able to know what your students are doing, what they're not doing, and you've got to know your students in and out. You need to know your standards in and out, and it's also going to imply, honing in your skills as a teacher. And it's hard work. It is hard work, but that's what we're doing here. So I feel like it's a process that has really allowed us to grow and deepen our own understanding, because now we really understand better what does this standard mean, and not to imply that we have it all figured out. We certainly do not. It's almost a conversation that we're always having to make sure and go back and make sure that we understand, make sure that we're teaching things in ways that are really getting to the heart of what those objectives are, as defined by your standards. So it's very much complicated. So, but as you can see, it's going to be very difficult to get to the heart of understanding if you can't get to the knowledge first. So you need both, but just keeping in mind that our big goal truly is that we're developing understanding. Okay, and then the last point, I've already brought this up earlier, but so the idea with understanding is that when we understand something, what we take away from it in our deep understandings, we would be able to transfer over into other areas. A lot of times these are seemingly unrelated. They can be very unrelated, but we can actually transfer over these understandings. So I want to kind of open that up with a little excerpt from on as this book goes into to discuss transfer. So this is kind of what it opens up with. So quote from page 39, "It would be impossible to overestimate the educational importance of arriving at conceptions, that is, meanings that are general because applicable in a great variety of different instances in spite of their difference. They are known points of reference by which we get our bearings when we are plunged into the strange and unknown. Without this conceptualization, nothing is gained that can be carried over to the better understanding of new experiences." And that was a quote that the book quoted from John Dewey, How We Think, on page 153 of his book. And then another quote, "Baking without an understanding of the ingredients and how they work is like baking blindfolded. Sometimes everything works, but when it doesn't, you have to guess at how to change it. It is this understanding which enables me to both creative and successful." And that is from Rose Levy, Barenbaum, The Cake Bible, 1988, page 469. So I think what this illustrates for us is that, the things that we're learning through amazing units, things that our students, at least what we should strive that our students are getting, is this deep understanding that, it's not just something that they understand in one case, one scenario, but it's really taking something and applying it somewhere else. Something that kind of illustrates this idea for me is I think about the work that we do with patterns. Being someone who is fascinated by patterns and who draws upon patterns, I just think this is the epitome of what this means. But we teach patterns in pre-first. We look at patterns, and we learn how patterns really help us to predict outcomes, right? They're predictable. We know what's going to happen. They repeat. So, but this is something we do not just in math, but this is actually something that we do in literacy as well. We know that in the pattern books, which, you know, as your beginning readers, we're using a lot of pattern language. But understanding patterns is something that can actually help you in any scenario in life, which is again something that I personally am always looking at. I'm very much just kind of drawn to the idea of patterns and how that plays out in our life. So kind of looking at patterns in any situation. Let's say it's behavior patterns. You know, if you pay attention to those patterns, there's a predictability involved, and if you can predict, then you can probably manage the situation better. You could pre-plan for it. There's a lot of things to be said about patterns, but this is just one idea how we can, you know, learn about patterns in one area and be able to apply it in a completely different area. So it's something, it's you know, more than just a skill. It's something, it's a concept, it's a deep understanding, and it's the ability to use that in a completely different situation. And that is truly what we are getting at with understanding. So amazing units are really designed around wanting to get at a big understanding, a deep understanding. And this is an understanding that will in turn be transferable into other areas. I mean, if it can't be transferred, why are we teaching it anyway? Because everything we do. Now again, remember, there's going to be knowledge, there's going to be factual information that's going to go into creating deep understanding. So I'm not trying to say you're only talking about anything that has deep understanding. No, please do not misunderstand me. We need knowledge, but just understanding that we're getting to we're going from knowledge and facts for the ability to create a deep understanding with our students. Now, to go on to quote a little bit more from the book, page 41, transfer is affected. Actually, let me back up. In academics, you must learn to transfer intellectual knowledge and skill. Transfer is affected by the degree to which people learn with understanding rather than merely memorize sets of facts or follow a fixed set of procedures. Attempts to cover too many topics too quickly may hinder learning and subsequent transfer. This just brings to mind so many things, but one thing in particular is, you know, when we hear teachers say, well, I've got to cover this, I need to get through this, and that's typically what happens when we try to cover things and get through things. We cover them, we get through them, but we have not affected learning in most cases. We might have given some information that has stuck. We might have provided, you know, new facts, but covering really is not the way to get to a development of ideas. To continue on with that, still on page 41, in training a child to activity of thought, above all things, we must beware of what I will call inert ideas. That is to say, ideas that are merely received into the mind without being utilized or tested or thrown into fresh combinations. Education with inert ideas is not only useless, it is above all things harmful. Let the main ideas which are introduced be few and important, and let them be thrown into every combination possible. And I think this kind of really lends itself to the Wiggins and McTighe's call for designing units under big ideas. So it's that, the so what of the unit. It's not just a bunch of different concepts. It's everything you're doing within the unit is working towards this deep understanding. So right now, I'll use seasons again as an example because we've just launched that unit. The big understanding is that our physical environment, humans, and people change throughout the seasons. Something that might be obvious to us, but not so nearly obvious to our young learners. And why might that be important? Change is not always easy for young students. And I really like this unit because it, even though we're not necessarily talking about changes that they're doing in terms of changing with, moving away from my house or changing schools or something that is emotionally affecting them, but just kind of understanding more about the world and changes in general. One would hope that knowledge, that understanding, could be transferred over into other parts of their life about changes. So, that would be the big idea. So you have to have a driver, something driving your unit that's making it meaningful. Because if you don't know where you're going, what are you developing understanding of? So, so this really lends itself, I think, to the big idea that's actually driving the unit. And I want to quote another part about transfer. Transfer, again, still on page 41. Transfer is the essence of what Bloom and his colleagues meant by application. The challenge is not to plug in what was learned from memory, but modify, adjust, and adapt an inherently general idea to the particulars of a situation. Students should not be able to solve the new problems and situations merely by remembering the solution to or the precise method of solving a similar problem in class. It is not a new problem or situation if it is exactly like the others solved in class, except that the new quantities or symbols are used. It's a new problem or situation if the student has not been given instruction or help on a given problem and must do some of the following. Number 1, the statement of the problem must be modified in some way before it can be attacked. Number 2, the statement of the problem must be put in the form of some model before the student can bring the generalizations previously learned to bear on it. And number 3, the statement of the problem requires the student to search through memory for relevant generalizations. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Let me just kind of summarize what we talked about today. So basically, we learned that there really is a difference between knowledge and understanding. When we think about knowledge, it's more surface level facts. It's allowing you to recall, plug in answers, but that's its primary function. You're not going to be able to do much more than that. Now, understanding, on the other hand, has much deeper implications. When we understand something, we truly understand the nuances of it. We understand when it is or is not appropriate. It's kind of the seeing what we cannot see and seeing possibilities. And I always like to call it or refer to it as seeing beyond, because that really sums up, I think, what understanding is. It's what you would not see on the surface. And to be able to see beyond the surface, to be able to see the unseen, implies that you're going to have a deep understanding of the inner workings, the relationships, the system, if there's a system in place, and the implications that surround that. And then lastly, we said our ultimate goal with understanding and how we can also begin to look at the levels of understanding is it's really transfer. If a student can only do something and perform under one circumstance, then there's not really a deep understanding. There has got to be ways for students to be able to use that understanding in a completely different scenario. And that's the goal. So they've got to be able to transfer it over into something else. Otherwise, the understanding, is not one that is very deep. Okay, you guys, so that's it. That's a wrap on episode 31, Knowledge and Understanding. And I really do hope that you got something out of this and that it will help you as you continue to think about your own units and as you plan those units. As always, if you have a question or you have a comment about today's episode, go ahead and tweet to me at TammyJ123. That is TAMIJ123. And I would love to hear from you. Last note before I forget, please remember that Time to Teach will be going on a winter recess. I just looked at the calendar today. Now I can't remember, but I think we've got 2 or 3 more Sundays, and then it will be another about a 2 to 3 weeks off. And again, if you didn't catch last episode 30, where I explained this, the show will be on winter recess just because for the holiday time, it's a very busy time. So I will still be working on the show. I will still be creating episodes for you, but because of the busyness, it's going to be much easier to not have a deadline as to when I should have everything edited, typed up, and published. So we'll be back definitely in January. The exact date I do not have because I need to be looking at my calendar and I don't have that with me right now, but just know there will be a winter recess and then returning. But we'll be back next week with episode 32, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.